You've landed inside Launch Street, the Business Innovation Podcast, where we interview top innovators out there shaking things up so you can innovate, differentiate, and get further faster. Since you're here, we know you're the type of person that recognizes the importance of unlocking your innovation advantage so you can compete and win. And now, your host, the person that has worked with leading companies like Disney, Procter & Gamble, Aero Electronics, the U.S. Army Research Labs, and Red Robin on upping their innovation advantage, Tamara Gontor.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, middle of the night, wherever you are, innovators. Hello to you. As usual, we have an exceptional podcast for you today. Before we dive in, I have one nugget I want you to consider. I heard an interview with John Cena this past weekend. I don't know if you know who he is. He was a wrestling star. I don't remember if it was WWE or WWF, but one of those wrestling stars turned movie star and business entrepreneur. And the interviewer asked him if he was following in the steps of The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, who also started in wrestling and moved on to great movie and business fame and success. And, you know, who wouldn't want to follow in his footsteps? But I loved John's response. It was, I don't want to be the second Dwayne. I want to be the first me. And then he said this, if you try to copy someone else, that's all you'll be, a copy. I just love that. I think that also applies to what's most valuable and unique about you, how you innovate. How you innovate is unique to you, and it's different than how I innovate. That's unique to me. And if you try to be an everyday innovator like me, you'll fail. If you try to be an everyday innovator like yourself, you'll succeed. If you haven't already, go to our website and take the online assessment, the IQE, that tells you in less than 5 minutes what type of innovator you are. And believe me, there's a myriad of unique combinations. Believe me, it's easier to just be your style of everyday innovator than to be like me, and vice versa, for me to even try to be like you. So there's a link in the show notes. You can go ahead and go take it. Now to dig in. More and more of the teams I work with are virtual or a blend of full-time, part-time contractors, but all spread out across the globe. Some work in the office, some work from home, some work in a co-working space. The way we work today is drastically different than it was yesterday. And that's why I have Derek Gallimore on today. He believes that outsourcing is one of the most potent and transformative business tools available today. It opens up your talent pool to a more diverse workforce, allows for a different type of collaboration and innovation. He founded Outsource Accelerator, which is like the Alibaba of outsourcing, and it provides the gateway for businesses to connect with outsourcing and suppliers. And we really dig into how this changes how you should think about the culture and how you continue to create collaboration when you're all not in the same space. I know this is something a lot of us deal with, so I think you'll enjoy this interview. Let's dig in. Derek, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Tamara. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you. So tell me, what's your first memory of being innovative?
Yeah, look, I've always been entrepreneurial as a kid, and you know, whether you consider that innovation at all, but I remember always pushing things to the limits. I was, as a small child, a really big fan of stilts, the big tall things that you stand on.
That's not something you hear every day.
No, and so I ended up monetizing that. We ran a stiltathon, and we got all the kids in the school on these stilts, and they were a little bit dangerous. But then we ended up selling stilts, and you know, so I always found a way to turn my passions into a bit of a business, right from as a young kid.
So, what was your first exposure to stilts that made you go, "I need more of that in my life"?
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? You know, it's strange what you sort of catch on to as a child. I can't quite believe it myself now, but I don't know. You just kind of mucking around in the playground, and you know, this is when I was probably about kind of 7, sort of thing. Yeah. But just fascinating how you could get so tall on something so simple and then not fall over.
Well, I don't know about the not falling over part for me, but good for you if you cannot fall over. That's impressive.
Yeah, that's great.
So listen, I want to set the context for people listening to this. So you believe that, and we're talking kind of about outsourcing and innovation today and how those two actually work together quite well, because I think we often think of them as either ors, or maybe more challenging if you build business that way. But you know, you talk about and believe that outsourcing is one of the most potent and transformative business tools available today. And I know a lot of us struggle with it, of like the benefit of it, but they're kind of some of the realities of it. So talk to us a little bit about why you think it's so transformative, and then let's go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm obviously a massive proponent of outsourcing, and I'm super passionate about this opportunity. And it really is a win-win for everyone involved in outsourcing, even though potentially it can sometimes be a little bit controversial or political. But in essence, if you boil a company down to its key components, it's really all about people and your staff, and and the professionals that you have on board. And outsourcing, really plugs you into an incredibly abundant and highly affordable workforce that you previously weren't necessarily didn't have the accessibility to before. So, I say that it's the most transformative business tool, and I really believe it is, because it can really take your business to the next level, because you have access to, over 7 billion people on the planet, many of them highly qualified, and many of them, that are happy to work for a fraction of, what you're used to. So it just really kind of opens up the whole world of opportunity.
So that's interesting. I never really thought about it as opening up your talent pool to a much bigger pool. And I would have to imagine not just abundant, but also probably more diverse workforce than if you're always grabbing talent from the same place.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we're moving towards a globalized workforce, and obviously a globalized world generally. And there are, 7 billion people. So why limit yourself and selection to just your geographic locale? Many cities in the US and in the sort of developed world now are actually struggling from super low unemployment. And people are actually really struggling to get the skills and qualified people that they need. So it really does open up the opportunities for finding the right people that you need.
Yeah, and I wonder too, maybe you can kind of speak to this a little bit. So I have a core team that's full-time. And then I've got several that I outsource to, but I would actually consider them full-time, part-time. You know what I mean? Like they're outsourced, but they're on my team so consistently that I really do consider them part of the core, even though they're technically outsourced. And I wonder if that attitude towards the people that you outsource with has changed, or if it's just me.
Yeah, look, and outsourcing is really just another form of employment. And like any kind of employment, you've got, full-time employed, you've got people working in-house, you've got consultants, you've got agency, and of course you've got the whole spectrum of part-time and project work. And the sort of offshoring that I'm talking about really can be represented along that whole spectrum as well. But then you're just adding another kind of paradigm or perspective that they're working from a different country. So, you get everything within outsourcing from, small projects done, get a logo done on Upwork and Freelancer. But the one that we concentrate more on is really treating them as you would a full-time employee, bring them into your team, bring them or make them a part of your culture. And, then you really won't notice the difference between any of your outsourced team and your, full-time permanent in-house team.
Yeah, I think if you ask me how many people are on my team, I would include them because I've worked with them for years. I just don't need them 40 hours a week. And some of them are across the globe and they're incredible at what they do. So, why wouldn't I? And I think we've seen it with the uptick of sites like Upwork and some of the other ones that really kind of give you a tool to find those people as well. I'm curious. So we talked a little bit about the upside of outsourcing, getting to kind of abundant workforce, the diverse workforce. When you think about it kind of overall, what are some of those up and downsides of outsourcing? If I'm leading a team and I need some more people, what do I really need to consider here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the upside is obvious when it works well, and that is obviously abundant access to the highly qualified human resource that your company is desperate for, or not your company, but companies generally.
Yeah. And no, I'm desperate for it too. It's okay.
I think we all are, because companies are restricted by limited resources. That's kind of the definition of a company typically, and so. accessing these resources really can liberate so many opportunities. There is an absolute downside, of course, and it really is the geographical distance and the culture differences that you might come across. Now, in terms of geographical, it was really hard, but I think now that technology is enhancing the communications that we have. I mean, you and I, we're speaking over Skype now. We're crossing multiple different time zones. It's becoming more normalized for people to interact over the internet and use software such as Skype and Slack and things like that. So I think the world is getting smaller and people are more used to communicating over different kind of devices and mediums. The culture is slightly different, and there's obviously a lot of stories out there of people maybe clashing with cultures and not being able to manage people effectively, and that is something that takes a little bit of kind of education. It's almost like learning slightly different languages. There's a lot of nuances there, and it really just takes a little bit of patience and a few processes and methodologies to conquer.
So I want to delve into this balance between innovation and really a culture of innovation and outsourcing. Because, I think, well, first of all, we're an innovation podcast, obviously, but also because I think that there's really some up and downsides probably to that as well. And it's this fine balance of, on one hand, I can save money, expand my workforce, do staffing differently. Yet on the other hand, I need to drive innovation and growth. So we just talk a little bit high level first, and then we'll kind of dig into how you balance those two things, or how even one can fuel the other if it's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see a company like a bit of an organic, process or life force even. And you are right. Like I think when you're saving costs, when you're cutting back, when you're reducing size, a lot of this stuff really dampens any innovation. So there is an association with outsourcing that you're cutting costs, and this is really winding everything down. To the contrary, when you have access to abundant resources for the first time, maybe you can actually go through incredible sort of innovation and growth. We see people that start outsourcing, they get their base team sorted out, and then as soon as they realize the potential, they're starting to explore new markets, they're starting to build new products, they can offer better customer service than they ever have before. And they then explore more aggressive strategies in terms of how to outcompete their competitors. So there's huge innovation, I think, that can be found just by having a little bit of spare time, having a few spare resources, and then kind of letting your imagination go wild.
And I would suggest, too, that you open up by saying, if you're doing this to cut costs, cut staff, cut whatever, that you're probably not, regardless if your people are all standing physically right in front of you or outsourced, that you're probably not innovating with that mindset anyway, because that's a very negative place to do those things from. I mean, not that I'm saying those things don't have to happen. Sometimes you simply have to cut costs, but that's not going to drive innovation to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I think like any sort of organic things, there is a feast and famine, and I think it's good for businesses to go through every aspect of that to keep themselves healthy. But certainly, within the feast process, when you're expanding, it is about creativity and innovation and a little bit of excess and trying things and testing things, and that is really where I think the innovation takes off. And that's where you find the strategic advantages, the new products come out, and that's where all of the exciting stuff really happens.
So I think there's this narrative that innovation takes massive investments, especially in your people. What do you think about that? How do you reconcile that with kind of what we're talking here with outsourcing?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said at the start, I think if you boil a company down to its bare constituents, really, people are a company, and the company is its people. And without really investing in those people, then you're not really having much of an innovative company. And I think that applies whether they are remote people, or whether they work for an external agency, or whether they're your core leadership team. Absolutely. It's absolutely critical to invest in your people, and critically make sure that they're aligned in terms of the mission and values and the drive of the company.
So how do you do that with people who maybe you're only talking to or seeing over Zoom, Skype, whatever, Slack, whatever thing you use? What is your advice for that? Because it's got to be harder, isn't it? Just a little bit to build the culture. I think we talked about in the beginning a little bit when they're not in front of you.
Yeah, it is. It is. Look, it is. And, so there's a few sort of sides to this. The remote working is obviously becoming huge, and it's becoming a big sort of conversation piece, a lot of narrative around it. The digital nomad scene is becoming big. And I think that with technology, it's almost giving people, a free license to work from anywhere and kind of, and I don't really buy into that, to be honest. I think there is a lot better efficiency if you are all within one location, sitting shoulder to shoulder. Now, having said that, I believe that having two offices where you can really take advantage of incredible, savings and opportunities can benefit the company overall, but don't have people scattered. When you do have, just a small number of offices, then you're just consciously working around, you're working the workarounds such as Skypes, morning meetups, sharing things on Slack, still celebrating birthdays, sharing stories, and getting to know people, even though you're doing it through these digital mediums. I tend to agree with you. There is a benefit in having the community and the camaraderie, but it's just doing the best you can, really.
Well, but what I appreciate about what you're saying is, it's really doing the same things you do for the people in front of you, just digitally, because they're not there. That's all. So to your point about, celebrating birthdays or anniversaries or wins and getting together for meetings, or I can't even remember what the company was, but I remember I was watching the news one morning and they were highlighting a company that's, I think they were at the $30 million mark. And the founders, the husband-wife team, I think they're in Silicon Valley, basically had 30 or 40 employees, all remote. And the film they happened to show was her on, I don't remember what platform it was, so we'll just call it Zoom, videoing with all her team. And she was talking about how the beauty is everybody gets to work from the place they want to work, and nobody's mad because they're stuck in traffic, and a happier workforce is a more productive workforce. And I thought that was a really kind of interesting way to think about it. And frankly, happier people innovate more too. So I don't know. I thought her story was cool and that clip too. I was like, wow, look at that. There's 30 people on this call. They're all video. And her point was really salient.
Yeah, it's a balance, isn't it? And one of the most famous examples is Automatic, which owns WordPress, which is a huge multi-billion-dollar company, and they are completely remote. Yet, ironically, all of the Upwork team that basically run Upwork, all of them are based in an office. They have a policy that they need everyone in the office to run the team. It is a bit ironic, isn't it?
I wouldn't have guessed that. I thought you were going to say the opposite.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. And, me personally, and also, comes down to, and innovation is leaning towards the more sort of creative, artistic side. And I think work, like anything, there's a balance, is a balance of discipline, grit and grind. And then you balance that with the creativity and the innovation and things like that. And I just query whether, necessarily people are always at their best when they're sitting at home or maybe working from their bedroom, as opposed to going through a bit of a formal process and getting into the office. But horses for courses, I think.
Well, I don't know. I mean, my experience has been, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. As I said, I have a lot of people who I would fall into that outsourced bucket. And for a lot of reasons, partially is it's a project-based thing that I need, or it's because I need them really 10, 20 hours a week, but I don't need full-time from them. And to your point, I wanted to tap a bigger pool than the people in my backyard. I live in Denver, so it's a pretty decent talent pool, but I wanted the best out there. And I think what I've discovered in the last 10 years of working this way and outsourcing so much is that the people that are going to be motivated to do good work are going to do good work no matter what. Now, they'll figure out what motivates them and how to work. And the people that won't. It doesn't matter if they're in their bedroom or not. They're not going to do their best work. I don't know. That's been my experience of it.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And we were talking just previously about how people communicate. And I think society is moving towards, it's not just we're innovating this stuff for work. You look at the younger generation these days, the millennials, and I think it's their preferred means of communication to text people and to communicate through devices, communicate in forums on computers. And so maybe, also equally, people now get more comfortable in their home environment, working in front of their laptop on their bed, and things like this. So I certainly can't speak for what is most efficient, but it's most definitely evolving as we go through time.
So what have you seen as some best practices, or what have you done around including your outsource team in the innovation process, even though they're virtual?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, to simplify, I think treat them exactly the same. There is an assumption that virtual teams or outsourced people are the kind of doers. They do the grunt work and the highly repetitious work, and they're not necessarily the leaders or the creatives. But that is a fallacy. You can get certainly in the Philippines where I'm sitting, you can get incredible scientists, PhDs, creatives. A lot of the Hollywood movies are now being post-production editing done here. A lot of the sort of cartoons are being completely produced here in the Philippines. So you do get incredible talent. You get very skilled leaders and strategists, experts. So by pigeonholing people, then I think that can really maybe limit or dampen people's creativity or scope. So really just treat them the same, onboard them, and give them that latitude to be creative and really sort of do their best within the role that they're given.
Well, I think to your point earlier about having this kind of abundant, and we added in there, diverse workforce, you might get even better innovation because you're tapping so many different types of people in different experiences and cultures and geographies and ages and all that good stuff. And diversity leads to innovation. So in a lot of ways, I could see how this really benefits innovation because, like I said, you're tapping you're cross-pollinating in a way that maybe you wouldn't have if everybody was in the office seeing each other every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it does, it immediately puts your business from being, if you're based in Denver, it feels like a local business. Whereas if you build an international team, that would have been inconceivable sort of 20, 30 years ago. But suddenly, just by kind of outsourcing a bit, you truly have an international organization, which is tapping into all of that. Yeah, as you say, the depth and value and different perspectives that everyone has. And it's only got to help. It does mean, though, we see that what people take for granted talking to people in their hometown, what they assume that everyone kind of understands isn't necessarily accurate. So it means that people have to sort of take one step back sometimes to maybe explain processes more, to build a bit more of a structure. But when they do that, it matures the company and then gives a really solid foundation from which creativity and innovation can really thrive and scale.
It's interesting what you're just saying about kind of assuming we all know what's going on if we're all in the same place versus when you've got people who are across the world from you and virtually from you, that you tend to back it up and explain things in a little more thoroughly. But what I've come to discover is that most of the time, those assumptions we have about how we all know how to operate are actually wrong anyway. Not everybody does know if we're all doing it differently. So that actually, that whole, to your point, that whole need to be thorough and to explain actually helps you get on the same page and scale with the people in your office just as much as it does with them virtually.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of ironic that, and that's where outsourcing can quite commonly fall down or people get disappointed because they very commonly outsource like sales or customer service, what they see as kind of like the low grunt work in inverted commas. But actually, someone in the Philippines has never seen snow. They wouldn't really know what central heating looks like, and they've very rarely come across carpet. So, they will fall down if there are sort of light conversations about what it's like living in Denver. Yet, if you look at it in a different perspective, you can get rocket scientists here, you can get PhDs, you can get medical doctors, or whatever internet marketers, and they would be able to speak very like in alignment with you on that subject, because those are they sort of transcend the local culture and the sort of idiosyncrasies of local knowledge. So yeah, it is interesting.
Yeah, this might be a tactical question, but how do you know which jobs to outsource, or is that just a matter of how your business is managed? And there's kind of a second question to that is, once you figure that out, is how do you think about hiring when you're hiring virtually versus live?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's a critical question, even though it is more tactical. But you've got core activities, you've got non-core activities, you've got high-value activities and low-value activities. You have client-facing activities and then sort of back-end activities. To start off with, now this is a sort of progression. To start off with, you would do non-business critical. You would do non-core activities that really define who you are as a company. And you would tend to do back office things that don't have that interaction with clients first. You start off with the safer things. You start off with the things as well that can be easily transferred. So if you already have a process for it and you have 2 or 3 people doing it, and it's easily contained, then that's also a good project to outsource. Unfortunately, people sort of tend to outsource the things that they don't like doing, or that they find really hard to do, or they also outsource things like customer service, and those aren't necessarily the right motivators for then a successful outcome. Equally, customer service is very, very commonly outsourced. Yet, if you think about it, that is the coal face of your enterprise meeting with your customer, and you have to be very careful when you hand that off to someone that maybe isn't as culturally aligned. There are tactics to it.
That was fascinating. And I hadn't really thought about the high and low value and kind of the way you think about the customer facing. And I do think it's funny. I think part of the reason that outsourcing gets a little bit of a bad rap is it often happens in customer service with, unfortunately, sometimes you get individuals on the phone that maybe don't speak the same language naturally. So it becomes a very frustrating experience as well. Or they're just so far removed that they don't have the accountability or the ownership to do anything about your challenge anyway. And I've always thought that was fascinating that people would start there with outsourcing, when, to your point, there's so many other places that would really benefit the business, and to be much more strategic about how you think about what you do and don't outsource. And I think, unfortunately, it gives a little bit of a bad rap, because it's not the person's fault on the other side of the phone. It's the company's fault for connecting me to them when we can't do what we need to do together.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's unfortunately a bit of a hangover from the beginning of outsourcing, when it was the old call center days, and it wasn't done as well as it should be. But of course, all of society was going through a bit of a learning curve with that. And there's certainly a hangover. But yeah, you can, and I see that. I see a lot of inquiries, and people want to outsource the sales, which is a hard job, and customer service, which is kind of considered a boring job. But I'm like, what about every other aspect of your business that is sort of infinitely more transferable and more easily replicatable, and potentially also of a lot higher value that can just as easily or more easily be done.
I want to kind of flip it to you in our remaining time and just ask you quickly, how do you innovate? How do you innovate?
Yeah, look, I would like to think that I'm relatively balanced with it. I never stop thinking about business. I mean, business to me is my baby, it's my passion, it's everything. I'm continually learning, reading, ideating. And then I suppose innovation really happens as a byproduct. It just kind of naturally comes out. But I like to be balanced in my approach in that, and it's a bit daunting sometimes in that I can come up with, 100 ideas in a day. But then I realize that maybe with a great idea, one idea could take 1,000 days just to execute, or maybe 1,000 years to execute one idea properly. So I kind of I try and balance my ideas, my excitement, my innovation with a sort of eye to execution as well.
I just, two things I want to point out, Derek, that you said. I'm really glad you shared that kind of that perspective on how you innovate. One is, it's great that you allow yourselves the ideas, because I think a lot of us actually shut ourselves down at that point. And the problem is then the brain goes, okay, no more ideas, no more innovation. That's fine. Like, we're done here. So it's great that you have them. The flip side to that is you can only execute on so much. And I don't know about you, but I have shiny ball syndrome. So the minute like an idea pops into my head, I'm like, oh, let's explore that. And I innovate kind of by doing. So I need to play with things. And we always joke that my business manager, who's kind of my right hand, Laura, that part of her job description is simply to tell me no. So that I move on, no tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because really, at the end of the day, to your point, ideas are amazing, but the reality is only so many of them should actually move forward to the next stage. So it's great to have a plethora of them to start, like a buffet of them, so you have a lot to pick from. But you really don't want to execute on everything you think about. You just can't, to your point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not denying the value of innovation or ideas. I think it's incredible, and it is a muscle as well. You get better at it, but also you can do an incredible amount of, I think, sort of testing and iteration just in your head. You don't need to even build anything out. You can kind of test it through its processes just by thinking about it. So you've got relatively low investment and overhead just by kind of going through that process. I think it's absolutely essential though. And I think you actually need space, you need time, you need a little bit of low stress environment, and you need the luxury of doing it. And it's super important to have that kind of balanced approach to what you're doing.
So I want to ask you this next question from the perspective of those who are being employed virtually or as outsourced talent. What do you think either stops or encourages them to innovate? It's kind of both sides of the same coin, really.
Yeah. Look, I think in a perfect world, you could kind of sit there and dream and innovate all day. But unfortunately, I think with every work, again, having these limited resources, there's always a lot of work pressure on people. And, with me, life gets in the way of life, and work gets in the way of business and innovation. And I think that's absolutely the same for your team, your employees. But, it's just really balancing that and giving people the space and luxury of enabling themselves to innovate. Because as well, that's where you're getting the high value from yourself, your team. And also, I think then that's when you kind of kick those home goals in your business. And what we were saying before is it's, I tend to, and I think a lot of us do, we get stuck in the day-to-day and the operational things, which are super important, but that doesn't really take your business ahead in leaps and bounds. So it's kind of realizing the importance of enabling people to think the big things.
When you say space to innovate, are you talking about time or other things?
Yeah, look, anything. I mean, Google, historically has had that one day a week you can work on anything. I don't know if that's actually worked out in reality or whether that's been maintained. But for myself, I I actually like to stay active. So I actually go for walks throughout the day. I either listen to podcasts, which I suppose is taking in kind of innovative ideas, or I just walk, in my own company. And then I suppose that's processing ideas and potentially innovating. And I think that's critical within the workday, just to balance things up. But yeah.
It is so hard, isn't it, when you're trying to balance all the things you have to do. And I do find that, particularly for me in the morning, I'm better in the morning for sure. I'm an early riser. If I just take a half an hour, even in the morning, to give myself some thinking space, I'm better off all day, because I know that all the fires that come in are going to take up the rest of my day. So for me, and it's different for other people, I know that if I give myself 30 minutes in the morning of space, regardless, I'll get to everything else. It has to happen, but I'm actually more productive in those things if I give myself space first.
Yeah, it's critical, isn't it? And I actually do that wrong. I spend a lot of time on my emails, and I kind of attack those, urgent, unimportant things first, which I know is I need more discipline, but it just seems kind of scary to give yourself the space at the beginning. But it's always something that I'm working on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not one to talk. I get up at 4 a.m. to go to the gym, but I check my email, which is like the thing you're supposed to not do, right? You're not supposed to check email when you can't do anything about it at 4 a.m., but I do, because I just need to know, do I have any fires I have to come back to? Do I need to start thinking about something? It just makes me feel better to know, even though I guess all the people out there, all the experts would tell you, don't do it tomorrow, but I do. Okay. Before we kind of close out, last question, where can people go to learn more and connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is outsourceaccelerator.com, and it's a completely independent website. We list about 700 outsourcing suppliers. We have about 5,000 articles on there and videos, and also another podcast. So huge, tons of information on there. Just have a look around and learn about outsourcing.
Awesome. What's your final piece of advice, Derek, for those trying to save, or let me just say save, outsource and innovate at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, for outsourcing specifically, what I suggest to people is that, if you're running a business, you cannot afford not to at least consider this. I'm not saying you need to do it, but as a business owner, everyone else is getting into this. It's a competitive environment, and you cannot afford to not consider this. For innovation, I think, as we've spoken about, allow time in your calendar just to think, give yourself space, allow some negative space for the creativity to flow.
And I think, to loop it back to what you said in the beginning with outsourcing in particular, that I had not really thought about, is if you save money and time and resources and all those things, you actually have more of that to devote to innovation and strategy. I'd never really thought about that. It's like, you're creating space.
It's huge. Like, it's not about saving money. It's actually about having 3 times more resources at your disposal because of the cost differential. And that gets super exciting when you realize you can now, play with excess resources and build your dreams out. So super exciting. Yeah.
Well, and so important. Derek, thank you so much for coming by. It's fascinating. I'm going to go back and look at how I structure my team and just make sure that I'm treating them, kind of to your point, equally as the ones in the company, because they're my team, just like anybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for hanging with us on Inside Launch Street. If you know someone that is truly ready to unlock their innovation advantage, have them join you on Launch Street. Discover your innovation advantage. Build a team of high-performing innovators and ignite ideas and solutions that create massive impact. GOTO, launchstreet.com. Remember, innovators, if you don't take the leap, somebody else will.